Okay, so in Britain, the term state became associated with the people rather than the state, and with parliament rather than an all-powerful monarchy. Before the revolution, French nationalism was around the state and the monarchy, where the British have a more individualistic notion of nation. The French think of more of the nation as the people, as a collective entity. Statism, for the French, the state is responsible for the country's economic well-being rather than private enterprise or society. So you can see these things reflected, right? For example, in the French work week, which is considerably shorter, right, than our work week. I think the last I heard is about 35 hours maximum, right? In the French political culture, the generous vacation, the reliance on state intervention, right, to correct for capitalism. So Darrow notes that French nationalism stresses the state, not individual liberties, and that this could actually retard the growth of a moderate democratic political culture. So if you turn on the French news, you're going to see that the French love to protest, to the barricades, right? There's protests every day, strikes all the time. This is part of French political culture that's quite different from the Anglo-Saxon political cultures of both Britain and the United States. In Britain, the nobility contributed much to the development of democracy. But in France, the nobility, the middle class, and the working class are divided and don't provide some solid support for democracy. Some back authoritarian political movements. Right? So again, whereas the British political culture is noted for moderation and compromise, French political culture places much more of an emphasis on ideological difference, radical change, and mass protest. Okay. So we talked a bit about Charles de Gaulle. What is Gaullism and Neo-Gaullist? Gaullism or Gaullists refer to de Gaulle's ideas and their backers regarding a strong presidential authority at home and foreign policy activism in international affairs. France, for example, withdrew from NATO, right, with its policy of grandeur, meaning that they believed that the French, they felt that the United States was too dominant, and they believed that the French have a great culture, a great society that should be highlighted. So this has much to do with Gaullism. The Algerian crisis brings de Gaulle back to power in 1958 and leads to the Fifth Republic. De Gaulle was the bridge linking two warring traditions of French history: authority, as epitomized by the army, and democracy, the tradition of the revolution. His aim was a stable democracy. When do women get the right to vote in France? 1944, quite late. So we'll talk a bit about the state institutions. Again, it's a dual executive. The president is the head of state, prime minister is the head of government. The president serves for a 7-year term. Again, it's a 2-round direct election system. The highest authority of the state is likely to be the chief decision maker, except during these periods of cohabitation or divided government. Right? Who's in power now? Which political party is in power in France? The Socialist Party. The president names a prime minister who can be rejected by the National Assembly. He can dissolve the National Assembly and call snap elections. He may not veto parliamentary legislation, but he can ask Parliament to reconsider it. And he can place referendums before citizens with parliamentary approval, and he may be impeached only for high treason. So in this system, the president has a preponderance of power, as we've discussed earlier. The Prime Minister is nominated by the President and must be approved by a voting majority in the National Assembly. He is named by the President, but again can be rejected by the National Assembly, right, or censure. But this has only happened once. In 1962, the Assembly censored Prime Minister Pompidou, but de Gaulle reappointed him and called snap elections. The new Prime Minister may seek investiture or formal vote of approval by the National Assembly. The Prime Minister typically follows the President's policies if both are from the same party or orientation. He is responsible to both the President and to the National Assembly. And the President can appoint and dismiss cabinet members on the advice of the Prime Minister. Okay. So another difference between the UK and France, there is no tradition of parliamentary supremacy as in the UK. There is an upper house. The Senate has 321 members elected by a special electoral college, mostly representing the local governments throughout France. It can delay but not block National Assembly legislation. MPs cannot propose bills. They can't propose bills that would require an increase or decrease in revenues. Right? On the whole, the National Assembly is weaker than Britain's House of Commons, as well as the U.S. Congress. The Fifth Republic provides for a constitutional council that adjudicates controversies between the executive and legislative branches, right? And this is conceived as a brake on Parliament. Parliament can't enact any measure if the Constitutional Court decides it is incompatible with the Constitution. And like Britain, there's a civil service. It wields significant power in all aspects of economic and social life. So the civil service has greater powers than both the US and the UK. It can create bureaucratic regulations. And in France, this is kind of similar to Japan in some respects. The civil service is very elite, right? So many of the top managers of state agencies, as well as corporations, come from the very elite educational and social backgrounds. France remains a unitary state with the national government controlling most of the tax collection and public spending, as well as education, transportation, environment, and social welfare. All right. In terms of political parties, there are a large number of political parties that put up candidates for office in France. But it uses this two-round single-member district plurality system, right? And so what does that create? Again, a two-party system, that has something in common with the UK as well as the US. So the French party system is dominated by two large mainstream parties. The center-right neo-Gaulists, and the names of this party actually changes, the UMP, and the center-left socialists, who are in power now. And of course, there are many other smaller parties. Parties disassemble and reconstitute with amazing frequency. Right? All right. So French political parties tend to be much more ideological. That means that they belong to the families of the left or the right. Both tend to be moderate in their view, avoiding extreme socialism or extreme laissez-faire capitalism, and dedicated to democratic principles. So you have the neo-Gaulists, right, which is the right-wing party, but the right-wing party favors a strong state with strong state intervention in the economy. Very different to U.S. conservatives. but they tend to be anti-immigrant, anti-globalization, and you've probably heard of the nationalist Le Pen, and his daughter who've done very well in elections. The left-wing party is the Socialist Party, and the Socialist Party in France, even though it says socialist, it is really a middle class. It represents the middle class, French middle class, and places high importance on social welfare and civil rights for the whole population. There's also France's Communist Party, right? Which has also been very powerful. But you can think of France's Communist Party as slightly more to the left than France's Socialist Party, but both are social democratic parties committed to democracy. Okay. All right, so just to sum up, all right, both the UK and France are unitary states. Constitutional, right? The UK is a constitutional monarchy and parliamentary system, and France is a presidential parliamentary system. UK has had a moderate path to democracy, and France a conflictual path to democracy. The development of both the French and British state institutions are very different, as well as national identity. In Britain, the nobility contributed to the development of democracy, but in France, the nobility and middle class and working class are divided and don't provide solid support for democracy. Some back even authoritarian regimes. The clash between left and right is sharper in what country? In Britain or France? It is sharper in France, right? And this reflects a more antagonistic relationship between the working classes and the business community. Right? As in Britain, French government ministers, including the Prime Minister, are required to answer questions posed by members of Parliament. Very oddly, though, the President of France is never required to appear before Parliament. Very interesting. While the British procedure requires the cabinet members serve simultaneously as members of Parliament, the French have an incompatibility clause that makes cabinet service incompatible with membership in Parliament. So members of Parliament who are called to serve as cabinet ministers